Hello and welcome to the Power of Branded Content. Today we're going to be focusing on digital outdoor, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Claire Kimber, who's Group Innovation Director at Posterscope, and Kevin Henry, who's Head of Content and Sponsorship at Ocean. So before we get into the discussion, I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about what they do, and then tell us something we don't know about them. So if I can I'll start with Kevin.
Oh.
You thought I was going to start with Claire. But,
I did, that's the first curveball. Yeah, as you said, I head of content and sponsorship at Ocean Outdoor, and I effectively establish and look after the exclusive content partnerships that we have with rights holders and broadcasters such as Team GB or ITV or Eurosport. Those partnerships been developing over a number of years now. Something you don't know about me, I'm a keen motorcyclist, have been for, well, ever since my teens, but been riding sort of proper bikes, they say, for 20 odd years or so, and can be seen occasionally riding down the embankment at 2 in the morning and doing a volunteer blood service for the NHS. So it's it's where I get my thrills nowadays. That's about it. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. Thank you, Kevin. And what about you, Claire?
Well, I'm the Group Innovation Director over at Posterscope, which is a bit of a mouthful, but essentially I work within a team that looks after finding new creative technologies that can engage consumers right the way across the spectrum to then the back-end technologies, looking at programmatic, etc., and trying to harness all of that under an umbrella of creative thinking. As to something that you don't know about me, I unfortunately have nothing as worthwhile as Kevin, but I used to be a music journalist for the old days when music magazines existed.
Wow, well, back in the days of NME and stuff like that.
150 years ago or so, when music magazines existed. Yes, yeah.
Fantastic. So you're a muso then? Is that fair to say?
I mean, an irritating muso was probably.
They're probably the best type. So you guys, you operate in the digital outdoor space. So you work together in partnership. I don't know if you just want to tell us a bit about how you sort of work together. How does it work between you two, the two companies?
Well, there can be various ways that we'll come together. I guess most likely is in terms of answering a brief, answering a specific brief that we will have received via one of our clients. And then we will involve the guys over at Ocean to help us come up with the answer and the solution to that. There are, of course, the other ways in which we'll meet is via Ocean creating something proactively or bringing us a package that they have created specifically either for a potential client or as a wider reaching concept that we could then work out how we can slot that into a brand's needs over that coming year or so.
Great.
Kevin, you may completely disagree with that.
No, I think that summed it up perfectly. I think that obviously we, as companies, organisations, we're in day-to-day contact. Posterscope will be one of our main contacts. But I think, as Claire alluded to, there are many occasions, and we may come on to talk about a couple of these examples, where we're working on much longer-term projects. So we're sort of trying to visualise a sort of concept, 9, 12 months ahead around a specific property and creating all of the elements that with that, and that's the sort of the exciting innovation side of things that I can get involved in sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great point that working collaboratively is really, really important, and particularly in the branded content space, because I always say you can't do everything on your own, and I think this is a fantastic example of that. We've all faced a very challenging and difficult last few months with the pandemic, and we've seen some amazing campaigns and creativity from brands over that period through our global lockdown content showcase. So this is really a theme that we've really been developing called delivering value with creativity. So I just want to sort of ask you from the digital outdoor space in terms of branded content that how can we see our members, talk to them about delivering value through creativity in the outdoor space? So, I don't know Kevin, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. And I think one of the first aspects I'd say is there probably, from my point of view, there isn't enough examples of this happening in the moment for out of home. And that's something that's sort of a real mission for me. But I think one of the key points first is really adapting to the environment in which you're reaching those consumers. And I think in the past, we've perhaps had repurposed copy that has been used where more appropriately it would have been far more bespoke copy. And we've run research over the last few years through neuroscience that's really highlighting on a very broad level what is the most impactful type of creative, i.e. use of full motion to really harness the benefit of the screen technology that's in the market at the moment. Having some form of call to action that links out of home with mobile or some subsequent screens, because the real value of the type of branded content we can put out on out of home is it elicits some form of behavioral response in consumers, directing them then to a physical or virtual destination. And then the last side of things, I think for me, is the exciting area around live broadcast of content, use of technology and data feeds that make it temporally relevant or geographically relevant as well.
Okay. And what about you, Claire?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. I think creativity is that broadest of terms in advertising, right? But I suppose if you simplify that, what we're talking about is very, very simply cutting through and gaining some meaningful attention from consumers, right? And so if your brand behavior is just really, really slightly different in this space, then you're by default going to cut through. And to Kevin's point, instead of simply repurposing something and creating something that's actually bespoke and meant to be viewed on that screen or engaged with in that particular way, just makes it work even harder. And we've also conducted studies that would absolutely support the fact that if you blend elements of relevance into that creative, these really simple pulses of creativity, whether it's the time, weather, a location relevance, that increases brain response by something like 18%. So that by adding these tiny little augmentations that we can call creativity, it makes your creative work harder and thus delivers you value.
Yeah, no, I certainly see that. I mean, from a taking a longer term view perspective, I mean, is the market more reactive? Are you seeing people coming in and doing more tactical rather than more strategic work? I mean, what has really been the last few months like?
There's definitely been an emphasis on the tactical and the reactive, and within that, really importantly, getting the tone right to reflect the current situation. But I think there's something very interesting in viewing, or indeed moving away from viewing digital out of home as purely a digital poster, and realizing and re-educating about the value that it can deliver in terms of reappraising what we can do with those screens, right? It's a networked set of screens that you can use as a content distribution network, right? In the simplest of terms. And I think from a long-term perspective, if your brand is creating content for social channels, for VOD, then equally how you're behaving in digital out of home and how you're using digital out of home as a content channel should also be part of that mix by default. So I think first and foremost, we're all trying to seduce the eyes of consumers. So therefore, your annual content distribution strategy should absolutely involve a strand of digital out of home.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, agree. And I think one of the things that we set out, sort of going back 4 or 5 years now, what we were trying to do was to almost legitimize out of home's position within an all-screen market. We felt that it was incumbent on us to give advertisers reasons to use our screen, because ultimately, we foresee an opportunity for us to be delivering far more consistent content across across the network. And obviously, given our current dependence on a largely sort of commercial loop model, that's quite a challenge. But we know from our own research that people want to see more of this. And I think brands will start to understand the benefit of integrating their messages across multiple platforms, of which out of home is just one part of that sort of digital journey for them. So we see the opportunity for brands to be reaching consumers with sort of companion messaging and reinforcing messaging, whether they're at home on their mobiles or in front of a massive screen at Westfield.
Mm. Who do you think is doing a good job in that space at the moment, in a branded content sense? I mean, you said there were a few examples, but not enough. Is anyone sort of spring to mind?
I mean, JLR, of course, with ourselves and Ocean. But I think to Kevin's point, that there is unfortunately very few examples with which we can sort of hold aloft benchmark campaigns. JLR, of course, being probably one of those key examples. But I think there's something interesting in the way that Spotify use digital out of home, and they use their own content and data really, really creatively. Similarly, Netflix, who use digital out of home to extend their show narratives and turn the channel itself into engaging, shareable content. So I think it's probably semantics, but there are, I think, in other interesting ways of viewing what digital out-of-home content can be and is. So
through a content-led strategy, I think that's really the key point there. So in terms of, what are the emerging trends that we're seeing? Is it sort of the big, VOD players are kind of seeing it as an extension of their content? This is a really interesting development from our perspective, is how it's that, I think Kevin said earlier, it's that integration, it's that seamless nature of how to use and amplify digital outdoor in that respect. Do you see that as something that's going to continue?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting this year, and in so many aspects of sort of personal and business life, this year has been sort of pivotal to how we then go forward and how we're changing our behavior and sort of hastening change in some areas that would have otherwise taken a lot longer. And I think brands have found a real challenge this year, and you've seen the sort of the diverse nature of their reactions of how to be relevant. And if they are going to give messaging, it has to be contextually relevant, it has to be empathetic. And I think it's brought a new type of delivery of sort of messaging there, because they're obviously keen to have that relevance and not be seen to be capitalizing on that wider narrative around the pandemic. But I think, just going back to what we were saying about brands do it well, I think, and I'm not sure whether these are all necessarily sort of very typical out-of-home examples. I think TikTok are doing some really fantastic innovations in the out-of-home space and really sort of harnessing that sort of dual screen usage in there. I think that also another one that sort of has been on my radar for a while is the Maltesers, the light side of life, and they brought out a sort of an isolation life version using just sort of women coming together talking about the sort of situations in lockdown, and it was just a really clever, contextually relevant way, kind of empathizing with people's situations that they could put forward there. As I say, I'm not sure that necessarily was distributed across wider out of home, but they're some of the ones that stand out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think also as we sort of move towards a newer normal, whatever you want to call it, with the vaccine coming along, and we are going to see people going back to events. But as you say, I think your point there was having sort of live content outdoor could be an interesting area of development, because you're not going to get 50,000 people in the stadium, but you could have people viewing in an outdoor, safer environment. Do you think that could be something of interest?
Yeah, well, actually, just thinking about another example there that people wouldn't have seen in its delivery, the recent launch of PlayStation, and so this fantastic piece of creative was made for Piccadilly, and it was using sort of 3D technology to emphasize the scale and the curve of Piccadilly. But it went out at 10 to midnight on a Tuesday when there was probably one man and his dog there. But the whole emphasis was about using that iconic screen location You know, most people go there to take a picture, a selfie of themselves there, but it was then that content distributed across all of PlayStation's channels. And that's a really exciting kind of evolution where, you know, it's been recognized the value of integrating these different elements and different medium together.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, from a member organization like the BCMA, you know, we want to help our members to develop and you know, do more business. I mean, is there anything as an organization we should be doing? You've already said you've done a lot of research in this area. I think it's something that we should definitely be sharing with our members on a more regular basis. But is there anything we can do to help you in pushing out this really positive message? It's an open question. Maybe Claire, you'd want to have a view on that.
I think just really sort of encapsulating all of the various points we've been making is about, I think the biggest change could come from the way that digital out of home is being viewed and what its use case is. That it isn't, again, coming back to it's not just as black and white as it's a digital poster. It can be multiple things. It can perform multiple tasks. It can deliver multiple things.
So accountability, effectiveness, and all those sort of things.
Absolutely. If you want it to, you know, to follow a suite of brand KPIs versus some e-commerce metrics, you know, the whole suite of marketing and content marketing can also be facilitated with digital out of home. So I think just reframing the channel as such would be really, really useful.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen any, you know, obviously, as I say, difficult time for everyone, but is there anything that you've seen positively that's impacted the business and you can take that forward? You know, what are those things that have really, you know, you've really seen a change?
I think it's again, it sort of follows on from the last point, which is that definite desire to think creatively, think around the problems. We've all been faced with problems, right? And so we've had to adapt thinking, we've had to adapt approaches to address those problems and come up with pertinent solutions. So I think it's been positive in terms of driving that reappraisal of the value and the placing within your media mix, and what out of home can bring within that party.
I mean, we've certainly seen from other members that the decision-making process has been streamlined. Things are happening more quickly, which I think is a really interesting development and potentially a positive going forward. So, Kevin, did you have any thoughts on that in terms of the future?
I was just thinking, we ran a sporting webinar back in June, and it seems a long time ago now.
I remember, I was there. It's very good.
So you remember when we had Vinay, who the managing director of Arsenal, and one of the things that he said, just sort of encapsulated at that time for me, he said within his organisation, the only certainty was uncertainty, and that's what he was managing on a day-to-day basis, and sort of, you know, professing that transparency was absolutely key. And I think that really sort of stayed with me afterwards when we were coming out of 2019, having done an amazing campaign with JAG and Wimbledon Live. We'd run highlights from every World Cup game, Rugby World Cup game on our screens, and we're entering a year where we were going to have sort of the Olympics and the Euros. So all of those within a few months were either cancelled or postponed, and then we had to understand, well, what do we do? You know, how do we keep our partners relevant? What content should we show that actually is of benefit and people want to see? So we ran Wimbledon content from the greatest games of all time, again using Piccadilly because of the nature of exposure, and London 2012 highlights with Eurosport. So I feel, you know, kind of proud that we've been able to stay visible, and I think that's something that's apparent from an out of home perspective as well. I think that all of the companies within out of home have shown sort of incredible ingenuity and resilience around this whole situation, where we are probably, outside of cinema, the hardest hit of any media channel at all.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I mean, you know, it's good to have a positive outlook. And I think that, you know, 2020 has been an awfully difficult time. I think 2021 is looking much more positive, and I think we've got to look forward in that respect. Thank you to Claire Kimber from Posterscope and Kevin Henry from Ocean, both BCMA members, for sharing their views today on digital outdoor branded content. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know more about the BCMA, please visit us at www.thebcma.info. I'm Andrew Cantor, the Global CEO of the BCMA. Thank you for watching.